Hello there, wanderer. Tonight, we're slipping quietly back in time, to a humble village in medieval France. A place where bread was more precious than gold, soup was a daily ceremony, and, oddly enough, spoons were sometimes treated like scandalous contraband. So find yourself a cozy spot. Loosen your shoulders, maybe let your head tilt back just a little. Because in this story, we'll walk narrow lanes lined with ivy, linger by smoky hearths, share a few shy laughs over simmering broth, and gently uncover why these villagers once frowned on personal spoons, but still threw joyous feasts where everyone dunked their bread into the same steaming pot. And if all of that sounds delightfully dull, that's exactly the point. Because boring history? It's often the very best kind for sleep. Full of small, tender moments, half-forgotten customs, and soft mysteries that slip through your fingers like warm flour. Before we drift off completely, go ahead and tap like, maybe subscribe if you'd like more gentle rambles through odd corners of the past. And I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. It's a quiet sort of magic, seeing all of us scattered across the globe, sharing one sleepy story together. Alright. Now breathe in, let it out slowly. And let's wander into this little village, where spoons are suspicious, soup is sacred, and the night is waiting just for you.
You arrive on the edge of a medieval French village just as dawn unravels itself across the horizon, like a shy child peeking from behind a tapestry. The sky is painted in sleepy smears of lavender and pale butter yellow. Birds test out cautious little trills, almost embarrassed to be the first ones up. You can smell damp earth, with smoke, and a faint note of onions boiling somewhere, which is honestly quite comforting, unless you skip dinner. You probably did. Per planning on your part, really. A rooster declares himself king of this dirt patch with a ragged crow, and you shuffle past low cottages roofed with shaggy thatch, each shedding droplets of dew like nervous sweat. Your feet crunch over a path scattered with bits of straw and tiny snail shells. Somewhere, a donkey clears its throat in a long, despairing bray that sounds suspiciously like your inbox on a Monday morning. And before we get too lost in this world, where spoons may or may not get you side-eyed by local officials, take a breath with me. Let it out slowly. If you're still awake, and honestly, that's impressive, consider liking and subscribing so you can wander into more sleepy corners of history with me later. Also, pop down into the comments and tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining this little midnight procession. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You probably won't make it through this day, at least not consciously. That's perfectly all right. Sleep can carry you the rest of the way. As you walk, the village opens around you in soft murmurs of daily life. Women in coarse wool gowns sweep doorsteps or dump out buckets of suspicious water that you politely pretend not to notice. A child scuttles past with a wooden hoop, chasing it down the lane, giggling like a tiny demon set loose. A baker's stall yawns open nearby, offering shy curls of steam and the gorgeous perfume of fresh bread. You might wonder about grabbing a warm hunk of it, but coin is tight, and besides, you've got bigger curiosities to chase, like why people here treat spoons as if they're scandalous undergarments. Major historical fact: in parts of 13th and 14th century France, local guilds and councils did impose regulations on eating implements, sometimes even discouraging or outright restricting the personal ownership of certain table tools. Why? Public feasts and communal norms prioritized shared trenchers and drinking vessels, fostering a sort of forced intimacy that, if we're honest, would make modern germaphobes spontaneously combust. You edge past an inn where travelers lean on splintery rails, clinking mugs in a language thick with Breton or Norman accents. They grin with teeth arranged in chaotic patterns, some conspicuously absent, likely donated to the patron saint of bad dentistry. Obscure tidbit. By the way, some villages believed if you slept with a spoon under your pillow, it might attract mischievous spirits who would tie your hair into knots by morning. So there's that to keep you company tonight. Historians still debate whether these anti-spoon ordinances were genuinely enforced laws, or more like strongly worded suggestions from cranky old men on local councils who thought sharing a bowl built character and maybe a bit of community halitosis. So you keep strolling, your breath puffing small ghosts into the cool air. A woman passes with a huge pot balanced expertly on her hip. From inside, the scent of simmering herbs and marrow bones sighs out, tempting your empty stomach in rude new ways. You follow, because you're only human, and because tonight's story is very much about soup, the kind that could make or break your social standing in this little medieval cosmos.
You trail the woman all the way to a modest stone hall at the village's center, its wooden beams draped with faded pennants that look like they've survived 3 generations of moth banquets. Inside, the community feast is already bubbling to life. People are arriving with baskets, pots, and wooden bowls tucked under their arms. Some place hearty loaves on a long trestle table. Others offer chunks of cheese wrapped in cloth or pale, wobbly pies that smell faintly of honey and sage. You sidestep a goat that appears to be an uninvited guest. He eyes your tunic like he's planning a chew. Near the hearth, a monstrous cauldron belches little clouds of aromatic steam. A stew thick with barley, onion, scraps of turnip, and, on lucky days, a glistening scrap of pork. This is not the delicate consommé of Versailles. This is rustic peasant fare designed to make your belly grateful and your teeth work overtime. A lanky man, possibly the stew's self-appointed guardian, stirs with a wooden paddle almost as tall as he is. He watches suspiciously to make sure nobody double dips. In a world that frowns on personal spoons, sharing is mandatory, and that means trust is essential. Imagine potluck dinners today where everyone dunks their bread directly into the serving dish. Congratulations, you've just invented medieval French etiquette. Major historical fact: these communal pots weren't just friendly neighborhood gatherings. In many towns, local lords or church officials organized potages communes, community stews, to feed workers after big projects like repairing roads or harvesting fields. They were social glue, but also a clever form of labor compensation when actual wages were thin on the ground. Obscure tidbit: some households even kept a perpetual stew simmering on the hearth for days or weeks, adding new ingredients as they went. If you're squeamish, just pretend it's an artisanal broth aged to perfection. Historians still puzzle over whether the suspicion toward spoons was mostly about hygiene or hierarchy. Was it that spoons suggested you were hoarding, keeping your portion separate from the collective? Or did they simply think it was a slippery slope from private cutlery to private everything, an existential threat to communal life? Opinions swirl thicker than this barley stew. Someone thrusts a chunk of bread into your hand, dense, a bit sour, studded with rye. You tear off a piece and dunk it straight into the pot. The broth clings lovingly, heavy with the richness of marrow and old garlic. As you chew, flavors bloom across your tongue, humble but profound, like discovering poetry in a grocery list. You wander back to lean against a pillar, wiping your fingers on your sleeve like everyone else. The hall hums with quiet satisfaction. People chew, wipe their mouths, grin at neighbors with broth-slick lips. Even the goat, finally accepted, tugs an abandoned bread heel near the door. A thin woman with sharp elbows and a softer smile nudges you, whispering that tomorrow there'll be another feast, with even more onions if the harvest cooperates. You promise to be there because really, what else do you plan? Sleep, perhaps. That's coming. But for now, there's soup, shared heat, and the gentle music of spoons mostly kept at bay. Morning has now surrendered fully to a gentle afternoon, the sort that drapes itself over the village like a lazy cat. You slip out of the hall, belly content, fingers still perfumed by broth and garlic. Outside, the air is cool enough to keep your skin awake, but soft enough to be kind. A pair of boys dart past you, their laughter cracking the quiet like thin ice. You wander aimlessly, shoes whispering over the packed earth. Tiny daisies peek through gaps along the path, defying centuries of foot traffic with scandalous optimism. Around you, the cottages seem to lean slightly inward, conspiratorial, as if they've been whispering gossip about you all morning. Not far ahead, a narrow lane opens into a sort of marketplace, though market is a grand word for a handful of carts under a stretch of fraying canvas. Chickens cluck indignantly at being penned. A girl sits behind a small pyramid of apples, absently scratching her ear with the hem of her apron. She offers you a smile that's half sleepy, half curious. Nearby, a traveling peddler unpacks his bundle with theatrical flair. He lays out combs, pins, and an alarming collection of small knives. Each glints in the sun with the smugness of something that knows it's sharper than most people you'll meet today. Major historical fact: medieval markets weren't strictly regulated affairs. In many places, they were pop-up economies governed by local charters that could be astonishingly flexible, meaning the same corner that sold garlic today might sell goat hides tomorrow. Or if fortune smiled, both. Because who doesn't want their goat hide perfumed with a touch of garlic? You pause at a stall displaying rough clay bowls and plates, painted in hurried spirals of brown and ochre. There are spoons here too, big, small, some carved from horn. The vendor eyes you with a hint of mischief. Not planning to eat alone, are you? She teases, wagging one of the spoons at you like a scandalous invitation. Obscure tidbit. Believe it or not, in parts of France during certain feast days, townsfolk would set up mock trials to playfully accuse neighbors of hoarding utensils. It was half joke, half social policing, a way to reinforce the value of sharing under the guise of theater. Historians still can't decide if these little performances had teeth or if they were merely rustic entertainment with a dash of moral wagging. Either way, you laugh politely and decline the spoon, pretending you're far too sophisticated for such solitary dining. You continue down the lane, the voices of barter and small insults floating behind you. A man hawks bolts of coarse linen dyed in greens and dull reds, calling out prices that even you can tell he's making up on the spot. He winks at you as though you're both in on the con. Somewhere a pot clangs against stone. A dog barks at absolutely nothing. You exhale and feel the afternoon sigh with you. This day is going nowhere fast, which might be the most relaxing itinerary you've ever had. Section 4. Your feet eventually steer you toward the outskirts again, where the noise softens and green fields take cautious bites out of the village's edge. Here the air carries the faint tang of manure, but also something sweet. Wildflowers sneaking their perfume into your nose before you can protest. A low fence, more suggestion than actual barrier, lines a pasture dotted with goats. They regard you with a brand of judgment only goats possess, chewing slowly as if composing philosophical treatises they'll never bother to publish. Past the goats, a narrow dirt trail winds uphill toward a modest church. Its stone walls are sun-bleached, and ivy grips them possessively. A tiny bell hangs in the tower, looking slightly embarrassed by its own smallness. Inside, the church is cool and dim, the air thick with the ghost of 100 prayers. Wooden pews stand in neat rows like obedient schoolchildren. Candles sputter along a narrow altar, spilling pale yellow tears down their sides. Major historical fact: churches in medieval France often doubled as town halls, community kitchens, even shelters during storms or conflicts. The boundary between sacred and secular was as fuzzy as your mind probably is right now. You drift down the aisle, fingers brushing the backs of pews. Here and there, little carvings peek out, faces with mischievous grins or solemn eyes, bits of folklore captured in wood. One figure looks suspiciously like it's sticking out its tongue. Major historical fact: churches in medieval France often doubled as town halls, community kitchens, even shelters during storms or conflicts. The boundary between sacred and secular was as fuzzy as your mind probably is right now. You drift down the aisle, fingers brushing the backs of pews. Here and there, little carvings peek out, faces with mischievous grins or solemn eyes, bits of folklore captured in wood. One figure looks suspiciously like it's sticking out its tongue. Obscure tidbit. Some medieval French churches hosted annual Feast of Fools celebrations, where local clergy would swap roles with lay people, wear masks, and parade through town. A day of playful chaos, under the approving eye of the very building meant to keep order. The church you stand in might have once witnessed such revelry. Priests dancing with butchers, widows playfully accusing bakers of stealing pies. Historians still disagree on how scandalous these feasts really were. Some records suggest they bordered on blasphemy. Others imply it was just harmless village clowning with a convenient excuse to drink ale before noon. You sit for a moment in a worn pew. The wood creaks under your weight, as if it, too, is tired. A faint draft ruffles your hair. Outside, the bell finally stirs, giving a lazy half-ring that startles a pigeon into launching itself from the ledge. You lean back, let your eyes drift shut. The quiet here isn't absolute. There's always a cough, a shuffle, the soft drip of wax. But it's gentle, like being wrapped in a blanket you didn't know you needed. You'll move again soon. The story isn't quite done with you. Remember that street you walked earlier, where the baker's stall yawned open like a sleepy mouth? You'll see it again, with new secrets bubbling under its eaves. For now, rest a moment longer. The village waits, soup still simmering, jokes still whispered about spoons and saints. You leave the cool hush of the church behind, stepping back into an afternoon that has thickened pleasantly, like cream swirling through warm milk. The sun now lounges low in the sky, spilling gold across everything it touches. Shadows stretch lazily, playing tag with your feet as you wander back into the knot of village lanes. Near the bakery, that same open-mouthed stall still breathes out gentle curls of heat and flour. Only now, the baker's wife has joined the small stage. She stands with arms folded, discussing something earnestly with a pair of stout matrons whose aprons carry more flour than fabric at this point. Their conversation is punctuated by sharp nods and the occasional scandalized hand flung toward heaven. Clearly someone's daughter has been seen walking home too late, or maybe someone's son hasn't bathed since last harvest. You linger at the edge of this domestic opera. The scent of bread is nearly hypnotic, thick with the dark, slightly sour aroma of rye and the faintly sweet edge of barley. A boy appears with a wicker basket, and the women begin loading in warm loaves, each one thumping down with a satisfying weight that speaks of hearty bellies later tonight. Major historical fact: bread wasn't just the staff of life, it was practically the whole scaffold. In medieval France, bread accounted for roughly 60 to 75% of the average person's caloric intake. That's not an artisanal trend, just survival, woven crumb by crumb into daily existence. You notice how everyone handles the bread with a peculiar kind of reverence. Even gossip pauses for a heartbeat when a new loaf emerges from the oven. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's just that when your next meal quite literally depends on this dough, you don't take it lightly. Obscure tidbit. In some regions, it was common to mark loaves with a simple cross before baking. Partly a prayer to ensure it rose well. Partly a charming insurance policy against goblins who, local rumor insisted, enjoyed collapsing bread out of sheer spite. Historians still shrug over whether most people truly believed in these flowery demons or simply used them as convenient scapegoats. Either way, if your loaf fell flat, it wasn't your fault. It was those pesky sprites. You drift on, chewing a crumb someone presses into your palm, warm, slightly nutty. It dissolves slowly on your tongue. Ahead, the street narrows again, winding like it's lost its sense of direction entirely. A cart rattles by, loaded with empty barrels returning from the wine press. The driver nods at you, his hat askew, eyes already dreaming of evening cups by the hearth. At a small crossroads, you pause. A cat suns itself on a doorstep, sprawled with such luxurious disdain you feel compelled to apologize for blocking its light. Somewhere nearby, a lute begins to strum, strings lazily plucked into a meandering tune that seems in no hurry to end. This is not a world driven by efficiency. It meanders, like soup simmering all day, like stories unspooling over hours. And if you nod off standing here, well, who could blame you? As twilight begins its careful descent, villagers gather again, pulled by the quiet gravity of supper and shared flame. You follow a slow parade back toward the hall you visited earlier, drawn by the promise of more warm broth, more bread, and, perhaps most importantly, more of the human company that stitches life together here. Inside, candles bloom to life along long wooden boards, their tiny flames dancing in uneven drafts. They light up faces with an almost conspiratorial glow, cheeks pink from the day's work, eyes bright under unruly fringes of hair. The big cauldron is back at it, bubbling with gentle authority. A woman schemes fat from the top, muttering a brief prayer that the marrow bones give up all their kindness tonight. You find yourself wedged between a broad-shouldered farmer whose hands look like gnarled roots and a sprightly older woman with a wicked grin. She eyes you up and down, then whispers that last year someone tried to sneak a spoon into this feast, stuffed right up their sleeve like it was some priceless relic. Major historical fact: by the late Middle Ages, even where spoons weren't outright banned, using your own personal utensils at a communal meal was sometimes viewed as suspicious, if not outright rude. It suggested you didn't trust your neighbors not to drool into the pot, which, let's be honest, might have been a valid concern, but still terribly unneighborly. Obscure tidbit: in some places, they countered this awkwardness with bread trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates. After soaking up all the juices and gravy, they were either eaten or given to the poor. A rather elegant solution, assuming you like your plate tasting faintly of yesterday's stew. Historians still argue whether these customs were mainly about hygiene or about reinforcing social ties by forcing everyone to quite literally break bread together. The answer probably is yes. You tear off a piece of bread trencher yourself, dip it into the steaming pot, and watch as it darkens with rich broth. It's astonishingly satisfying to eat your plate, something your modern dish soap might find professionally insulting. As the hall fills with low conversation, laughter drifts up into the rafters. Someone starts a soft song in a language you don't quite catch, maybe Occitan, maybe Breton. It lilts through the room like a gentle breeze, curling around candle flames and pooling in dark corners. The old woman next to you nudges your elbow. Eat, love. The night's long and this soup's short. You smile and obey, because what else can you do in a place where even the jokes come seasoned with centuries of gentle hospitality? Beyond the doorway, you glimpse dusk folding itself neatly over the village. The sky has turned the color of old violets. Somewhere a dog barks, probably claiming dominion over a bit of shadow. You lean back, sip a thin ale offered by your neighbor, and feel yourself drifting, full, warm, and quietly amused by a world where spoons were once the stuff of local scandal. You slip out of the hall eventually, stomach stretched pleasantly, cheeks still warm from candle heat and borrowed laughter. Outside, night is swept in like a soft quilt. The village lies draped in deep blues and velvety grays, stitched together by scattered lanterns. Their glow pools on the ground, honey-colored puddles that you tiptoe, through so as not to disturb. As you wander, you pass the baker's stall again, now dark, shuttered tight, resting after a day of heroic labor. A cat prowls the counter, nose twitching for leftover crumbs. It glances at you with bored contempt, as if to say, "Congratulations on discovering bread, you innovator," before leaping down and vanishing into the gloom. You follow a narrow alley that winds past low garden plots. The air smells faintly of damp earth, onions pulled and left in heaps, and a sharper green tang of crushed fennel. A man hums to himself as he pours water from a wooden bucket into rows of sleepy cabbage. The tune skips and stumbles, never quite finding its melody, which somehow makes it more endearing. Major historical fact. In medieval France, most villagers maintained small garden plots right by their homes, known as hortus. These kitchen gardens were essential, providing onions, leeks, herbs, and sometimes medicinal plants. Without them, the communal pot would have been an unrelenting parade of bland grains and tough meat. A toad watches you from a mud puddle. You nod in solemn greeting. He looks like he's considering offering unsolicited life advice. Obscure tidbit. Some medieval folk believed that planting fennel at your doorstep protected the household from witches. Not by scaring them off. Mind you, apparently witches found fennel irresistibly distracting, stopping to count its fronds until they lost interest in cursing you. A very practical anti-hex strategy, provided you liked aromatic salads. Historians still debate how earnestly such protective measures were practiced versus how much was simply cheerful local tradition, like hanging garlic just in case. It might have been more about community storytelling than genuine fear. Further along, you hear laughter drifting over a low wall. Peeking in, you find a small gathering, neighbors seated on rough stools, sharing the last sips of ale from a communal jug. Their faces gleam with tired affection. They tease one another about debts unpaid, goats gone missing, who danced worst at last week's feast. Someone notices you and waves lazily. Another shuffles over, presses a tiny cup into your hand. It tastes faintly sour with a ghost of apple. You sit on an overturned bucket, becoming part of their circle without ceremony. Someone begins a slow, rambling tale about a traveling merchant who tried to pay his lodging with a sack of frogs. Half the story is probably invention, but the giggles are real. The night deepens around you, thick with contentment. The little cup passes from hand to hand again. You almost hope it never runs dry. Eventually, the small circle breaks up. One by one, they rise, stretching backs, collecting cloaks, bidding sleepy farewells. You stand too, joints protesting slightly, and head back toward the heart of the village. The streets are mostly deserted now. A pair of lanterns swing outside the inn, their light catching on small motes of dust that drift like lazy spirits. The sign overhead creaks, a painted boar's head faded by rain and gossip. From inside comes the muted thump of boots on wooden floors, a snatch of song that sounds suspiciously off-key, followed by warm laughter that forgives it instantly. You pause at a stone well in the square. Its rim is worn smooth by generations of elbows, hopeful lovers, and people simply too tired to stand straight. You rest there a moment, palms against cool stone, listening to water trickle below. It's a hush that feels almost sacred. Major historical fact. Wells were more than just utilitarian fixtures. They were social hubs, stages for daily dramas. Many French villages even dedicated their wells to saints, hanging small votive offerings nearby in hopes of securing clean water and continued health. You notice a little wreath of dried flowers tucked into a crevice, probably left by someone seeking a blessing for a sick child, or maybe just grateful for another day without dysentery. In this world, gratitude can be profoundly simple. Obscure tidbit. There were curious taboos, too. Some places warned against drawing water after sunset, fearing it might disturb wandering spirits or invite illnesses lurking in the dark. Better to wait for dawn, when the sun would scare off anything lingering below. Historians still wrangle over whether these beliefs reflected genuine fear or merely practical habits dressed up in folklore. After all, drawing water in daylight helped you avoid, say, falling into the well, a decidedly unromantic but effective ghost deterrent. A slight breeze stirs your hair. Across the square, a shutter bangs lightly against a wall, as though the house itself sighs in its sleep. You stroll on, catching glimpses of hearth glow through cracks in wooden doors. Soft voices slip out, fragments of lullabies, murmurs about tomorrow's chores, gentle scolds to sleepy children. Near the edge of the village, you spot an old man perched on a stool. He's slowly whittling a stick into something that might one day resemble a fork, if only out of spite for all the anti-utensil talk. He gives you a nod so small you might have imagined it. The night presses in close, not menacing but intimate, wrapping everything in a shared breath. You move on, heart lighter than you realized. Maybe it's the mild ale, maybe it's the pleasure of existing, unnoticed yet somehow included, in a village that's made room for you. Spoonless, story-soaked content. Morning tiptoes in again, cautious and polite, as though it remembers how deeply you sank into the village's embrace last night and doesn't want to startle you awake. Light pools and soft gold puddles along the road, slipping between crooked timbers and curling over thatched rooftops. Dew beads along cobwebs strung like tiny chandeliers across fence posts. You drift toward the outskirts where small plots unfurl into wide fields. Here, villagers are already at work, tools slung over shoulders, baskets bumping against hips. A low murmur of chatter fills the air, punctuated by occasional laughter that rings with the bright surprise of bells. Near a split-rail fence, a young man and his mother stoop together, planting rows of onions. He digs methodically. She follows behind, tucking bulbs into the dark soil with careful, almost tender pats. Their rhythm is meditative. You stand quietly, feeling almost intrusive on their small, sacred ritual of coaxing life from dirt. Major historical fact: crop rotation was a familiar practice even in medieval France. Fields were divided into strips, some planted with grain, some with legumes or vegetables, some left fallow. This modest system kept soil from tiring out completely, long before chemical fertilizers were anything but wild alchemy. A dog ambles up and sniffs your ankle with a bureaucratic thoroughness, then decides you're uninteresting and flops down to nap right across your shoe. Its warm, solid weight anchors you to the moment. Obscure tidbit: in certain parts of rural France, people believed dogs who slept in vegetable rows could guard the crops from envy, an oddly specific superstition, likely born from equal parts practicality and poetic imagination. After all, a sleeping dog might chase off real thieves, not just jealous spirits. Historians still can't quite pin down whether these tales were sincere or simply cozy folklore to keep long hours in the field from turning monotonous. Either way, you scratch the dog's ear, and he thumps his tail once, duty discharged. You continue on, eventually reaching a small rise overlooking everything you've come to know: clustered cottages, twisting lanes, the little church bell shy in its tower. From up here, the village looks almost fragile, like something woven from straw and sunbeams. You can't help but feel protective of it, as if you've been living here all your life. Below, you spot the market starting up again, carts arriving like beetles, creaking under loads of cloth, salted fish, rough earthenware. The smell of fermenting apples catches a ride on the breeze, Someone's pressing cider nearby. The scent both sharp and lazy, a contradiction that suits this place perfectly. And just like that, you're drawn back down the hill, eager to see what new mischief the day might whisper about spoons, soup, or suspiciously industrious goats. By mid-morning, the market hums with gentle chaos. The same woman who teased you about spoons 2 days ago is now selling bundles of herbs, parsley, sage, and what looks suspiciously like something meant more for love potions than soup. She gives you a wink that confirms your suspicion. A cluster of children chase one another around stalls, shrieking with joy, nearly appending a basket of pears. An old man barks after them, waving his cane like a lazy conductor's baton, but his scolding melts into laughter before it even finishes leaving his mouth. You pause at a stall where a cooper demonstrates how he binds hoops around a new barrel. Each strike of his mallet echoes, a satisfying heartbeat against the general market music. The smell of fresh-cut wood mingles with fried dough curling in delicate spirals on a nearby cart. You consider buying one, decide against it, then reconsider because sleep stories apparently suspend all budgets. Major historical fact: markets like this didn't just trade goods. They were crucial hubs for exchanging news, rumors, and even matchmaking. Local lords and church officials often timed fairs with feast days to draw larger crowds, ensuring commerce and spirituality conveniently shook hands. Obscure tidbit: in some regions, it was common for traders to shout exaggerated descriptions of their goods, calling scrawny chickens plump enough to burst or humble onions worthy of a king's stew. A little theater sold more produce, even if the buyer might discover later that the royal onions had a decidedly peasant smell. Historians still scratch their heads over whether medieval villagers genuinely believed these market boasts or simply enjoyed playing along in the grand game of cheerful exaggeration. Either way, it made shopping far more entertaining than modern barcode scanners. You buy a small handful of candied fennel seeds, bright green, sweet with a licorice finish. As you crunch them between your teeth, a passing juggler tosses 3 wooden balls high overhead. One nearly escapes, but he catches it at the last second with a flourish so smug you can't help but clap. Your old friend the baker emerges from a side lane, sleeves rolled up, a smear of flour on his cheek that looks like an accidental brush from a lover's hand. He grins when he sees you, points toward his stall where fresh loaves cool in neat rows. You head there, drawn by gravity, or maybe by the warm certainty that bread still waits to remind you how simple joy can be. As you approach, he pulls a loaf apart with practiced hands, steam unfurling like a shy ghost. He offers you half without a word. It's soft, with a crackling crust, tasting of grain, salt, and a little bit of local sun. You lean against the stall together, nibbling bread, watching the market swirl. For a moment, it feels like the entire village breathes in one slow, contented sigh. And maybe, just maybe, you do too. You wander away from the market, the sweetness of fennel still clinging to your teeth, half a loaf of bread tucked under your arm like a polite pet. The lanes grow quieter again, narrowing into little veins that wind around the village's ribs. Here, the world seems to whisper rather than chatter. Past a low stone wall, you find a small orchard, apple trees twisting their gnarled arms toward the sun. Some of the fruit lies bruised in the grass, attracting lazy wasps that stagger drunkenly from bite to bite. A young woman stands on a stool, apron already sagging with fruit. Her little sister flits below, catching stray apples with hands too small and hopeful to succeed every time. They giggle over dropped apples, and the sound drifts across the orchard like dandelion fluff. You pause, lean your hip against the wall, watching as they fill a basket nearly to bursting. The younger girl catches you staring, sticks out her tongue, then immediately bursts into shy giggles that have nothing to do with mockery. Major historical fact: orchards were carefully tended treasures in medieval France. Beyond simply providing food, apples often ended up in cider, vinegar, or even as gentle poultices for minor aches. An orchard was both a pantry and a medicine chest, a rather handy bit of multitasking for a community that measured wealth in how many winter nights it could comfortably survive. Nearby, an old man kneels under a tree, digging around roots. You realize he's planting garlic bulbs, muttering under his breath with each one. Perhaps a quiet spell against rot. Or maybe he's just counting bulbs so he doesn't get lost in the task. Obscure tidbit: some villagers believe that planting garlic on certain days, especially Fridays, ensured the cloves would be more potent, protecting households from everything from fever to envy. Though historians admit many written records might be exaggerated after centuries of folk retelling. Historians still can't agree if these garlic customs were genuinely magical thinking or simply a way to lend rhythmic ritual to tedious chores. Either way, it worked. People believe in the story enough to plant with care. The older girl finally notices you too and offers a hesitant wave. You wave back, and she smiles, bright as a sunbeam through orchard leaves. For a breath, you're not just an observer in this sleepy village. You're folded gently into its daily fabric, an unexpected thread that still somehow belongs. You push off the wall and continue on, the orchard vanishing behind you as you follow another curve in the road. Somewhere ahead, faint voices carry, and your feet are more than happy to chase them. The voices lead you to a small clearing behind the church where a few benches cluster in a loose circle. Here, elders sit under a spreading chestnut tree, its leaves glossy and content. A boy sits cross-legged on the ground, playing a flute with more enthusiasm than skill. The notes tumble over one another, tripping and apologizing all the way down. A basket of mending rests near one of the benches, darned stockings, patches of linen that might become shirts again with a little hope in time. An old woman with careful hands embroiders tiny blue flowers along a sleeve cuff. Every so often, she pauses to suck her needle thread through her lips, squinting at her work with fierce affection. Major historical fact: clothing in medieval France was laboriously mended and passed down through families. Even humble woolen tunics might carry generations of careful repairs, little ghosts of each wearer stitched into every seam. Fashion wasn't fast here. It was patient, deliberate, stubbornly immortal. A pot rests at the edge of the gathering, filled with pale broth. A ladle stands ready, its handle worn smooth by hundreds of hands. Anyone passing by is welcome to dip their piece of bread or just take a sip straight. No judgment in a world where spoons are already suspicious. Obscure tidbit: some villages had informal broth corners, communal pots set over low fires where travelers or the very poor could help themselves without question. It was a quiet insurance policy against hunger, a way to feed strangers without making them beg outright. Historians still puzzle over whether these little gestures were born of true charity or merely clever social self-preservation. After all, in a small village, today's beggar might be tomorrow's neighbor building your fence. A girl with freckles sprawling across her nose like spilled cinnamon offers you a slice of carrot from a tiny knife. It's sharp sweet, with the earthy crunch of something pulled from soil only hours ago. You thank her, and she shrugs, half embarrassed, half pleased. The flute falters and stops. The boy laughs, blushes, and then tries again, each note this time sliding out like it's been greased with sunlight. The elders tap their feet. The embroiderer leans back, her eyes closed, letting the song pool around her. You lean against the tree, feeling its bark press firmly into your shoulders. It's a comfortable sort of roughness, reminding you that even stillness here has texture, history, a pulse of its own. For a while, you all simply exist together, flute, broth, thread, the soft dance of dappled shadows. And somewhere inside, your breath matches theirs, slower now, deeper, quietly stitched into this gentle afternoon. As the afternoon slides toward evening, you find your feet carrying you back along the main road, almost as if the village itself guides you by the hand. Lanterns begin to wink alive under door eaves, their small flames trembling in the mild breeze. The air cools just enough that you tuck your hands into your sleeves, the rough will scratchy but comforting. You pass a house where a woman stands with her sleeves rolled up, kneading dough on a wooden board balanced across a barrel. Her hands work with unconscious grace, pressing and folding, as though she's trying to teach the bread patience before it ever meets an oven's heat. A little girl clings to her skirts, humming tunelessly, occasionally patting the dough herself, probably contributing nothing but delight. Major historical fact. In medieval France, baking bread at home was common, but many villages still required the use of a communal oven, often owned by the local lord or church. Families would pay a small fee or surrender part of their dough for the right to bake, turning bread into a social and even political affair. In some places, you could gossip and bake simultaneously, two essential ingredients for village life. Past the house, the street narrows again, flanked by high wooden fences covered in ivy. Somewhere behind one of them, a dog launches into a spirited argument with the existence of absolutely everything, its voice echoing over rooftops. Obscure tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed that if a dog barked excessively at night, it might be chasing away wandering souls. So instead of scolding it, families would thank the dog or leave out scraps in gratitude. Imagine feeding your watchdog not just for security, but also as a tiny priest of ghostly deterrence. Historians still bat around theories on how deeply such beliefs were rooted versus how often people just made excuses for the dog being a loud little nuisance. Either way, it saved many canines from reprimand, which was probably their plan all along. You continue your gentle drift, turning another corner to discover a trio of neighbors gathered around a low table in the street. One of them scrapes a fiddle, sending thin, slightly sour notes through the air. Another keeps time by tapping a small drum balanced on her knee, while the third claps occasionally, more for encouragement than rhythm. They glance up and grin as you pass, inviting you with a tilt of the head to stay. So you linger at the edge of their small circle, tapping your foot in the dust. The music isn't polished, but it's alive, sprouting new flourishes every moment, imperfect but warm, exactly like this village itself. The sun finally relents, dipping below the horizon in a slow sigh of copper and plum. Night doesn't pounce here. It unfurls patiently, as if it knows everyone needs time to light candles, call children inside, or finish one last joke by the fence. You find yourself back near the old well. It looks different under lantern light. Less utilitarian, more secretive, a mouth that could whisper old stories if you lean close enough. The wreath of dried flowers is still there, shadowed and delicate. You rest your hand on the stone rim, feeling the day's stored warmth leak into your palm. Major historical fact. Wells often served as message boards. Notices, small tokens, or even bits of cloth tied to nearby branches might indicate everything from upcoming feasts to warnings about illness. For many, the well was as much a heart of local news as it was a source of water. Just beyond the square, a group of teenagers plays at a mock trial. One boy dramatically clutching an imaginary spoon to his chest, while two girls accuse him of selfishness with exaggerated gasps. They stumble through their lines, half acting, half collapsing into giggles. When the judge, A taller boy wearing a cabbage leaf for a crown bangs his imaginary gavel. The verdict seems to be that everyone owes everyone else a round of communal soup tomorrow. Obscure tidbit. Some local traditions made genuine sport of enforcing communal norms through playful courts. These were theatrical affairs, with neighbors lampooning each other's small failings, like hoarding extra bread, oversalting stew, or, yes, sneaking personal spoons to meals. Laughter was the verdict more often than punishment. Historians still debate if these rituals had teeth or were simply homespun morality plays that doubled as after-dinner entertainment. Either way, they gave everyone stories to chew over long after the pots were cleaned. You keep watching until the little trial fizzles out, replaced by an impromptu game of tag that darts between pools of lantern light. Their laughter rolls through the square, bouncing off the stone walls, chasing away any lingering darkness. Turning back down the lane, you catch glimpses of windows lit from within, families settling to quiet talk, hands mending socks or slicing the last apple for a sleepy child. You drift slower with each step, as though the night itself is pressing gently on your shoulders, urging you toward rest. By the time you pass the church again, the bell gives a lazy clink, stirred by some idle breeze. You tip your head in greeting, half expecting it to nod back. Then you wander on, thinking maybe it did. The village is fully cloaked in night now, wrapped snug in its quilt of soft darkness and lantern glow. You find yourself back at the large hall where your meandering story first began, where soup simmered, bread was passed hand to hand, and people shared sly smiles over communal pots that banished private spoons. This time it's quiet. The doors stand ajar, the inside dim except for a single candle left to keep away total shadow. You step in, and the wooden floor greets you with its gentle groan, a familiar old voice that's grown used to your tread. A few benches sit scattered as though they've wandered off mid-conversation. On one rests a small pile of straw mats, the sort villagers roll out when company stays too long or when laughter proves too heavy for narrow doorways. Without thinking, you settle onto one, folding your legs under you. The hall smells faintly of yesterday's stew and old smoke, an honest perfume, if not fashionable. Major historical fact. Halls like this were more than dining spaces. They were emergency shelters, places to hold trials or festivals, sometimes even temporary hospitals. When plague or famine swept through, these timbered rooms held the village together, quite literally. A building that could host laughter one week might cradle grief the next, proving that multi-purpose is not a modern invention. You lean back against the cool wall. From outside drifts the distant echo of someone humming. The sound is loose and meandering, a lullaby perhaps, or simply a tune meant to keep company with the night. Obscure tidbit. Some believed humming or softly singing around the home after dark kept mischievous spirits distracted. They might stop to listen and forget to wander inside, looking for trouble. A gentle way to keep both ghosts and anxieties at bay. Historians still muse whether such customs reflected deep-seated superstition or were just cozy habits. Tiny rituals that gave people a sense of mastery over a world full of unpredictable turns. You close your eyes, head tipping forward. A hush fills your ears, warm and heavy. In this moment, you could almost belong here entirely. Just another villager with broth on your breath, bread in your pocket, and more stories than years left to hear them all. Outside, the candle flickers once, twice, and then holds steady as though deciding to stay awake a bit longer so you can drift off in peace. Now, take a deeper breath. Let it out slowly, feeling your shoulders loosen. Picture the village folding itself gently around you. That well in the square, still cradling its secrets. The orchard sighing under the weight of sleeping apples. Even the goat, curled in some straw pile, dreaming perhaps of scandalous spoons. Imagine lanterns glowing behind shuttered windows, each one a tiny sun promising warmth and the hush of kind voices. Somewhere, the baker rests heavy-limbed beside his oven. The woman with the embroidery lets her needle slide from her fingers, eyes drifting shut while blue flowers still bloom across the cloth. Picture the streets empty, soft dirt bearing only the faint imprint of feet that wandered there all day. Overhead, the sky unrolls itself like velvet, pinpricked by stars that look almost curious about this little world of bread, broth, and shy laughter. The night breathes around you, patient and unhurried. Your own breath starts to match it, longer, softer. Let each exhale carry away any leftover chatter from your mind. Let it drift out the open hall door to join the humming air, to curl around the church bell and settle among ivy leaves. And if you're still here with me, awake in some small corner of your mind, know that this village will keep its gentle watch while you sleep. The soup will be warm tomorrow, the bread fresh. The jokes about spoons will still ripple through doorways, waiting for your smile. So rest now. Let the last images blur, the flickering candle, the cool floor beneath you, the faint perfume of garlic and earth. Let your thoughts wander off like lanterns down a quiet lane, bobbing softly into the dark until they vanish. Sleep well, traveler. This gentle story will be here if you ever wish to walk it again.